We start this morning with a wonderful session, actually, and a wonderful...
The most important session of the day, or actually of these 3 days.
It's the session we should have in the morning because it's the Far East where there is already day now. So, and it's actually introduced and moderated by a dear friend of DLD, Thomas Crampton. Know each other for a long time. Thomas, you've been... the session is on China, and you will introduce John and Doris Naisbitt and Joe Schoendorf later. So, but you yourself, you have been living in Asia how long of your career? You were with the International Herald Tribune and with the New York Times as a writer. How long have you been?
A total of about 12 years in Asia.
12 years, so in different countries?
Thailand, Hong Kong, Beijing.
Beijing. And then then you came to Paris, and then you decided at some point to close this chapter as an active, very successful journalist. You won many prizes with the paper, one of the best papers in the world. And you said, I want to move to Asia with your wife. And what did you do then?
I left the best job in the world, which was a Paris-based feature writer for the International Herald Tribune, New York Times. But decided that I wanted to get involved in what my passion was, which is social media.
Social media.
And now moved out to Asia, and there I spend my time now running the Asia-Pacific social media strategy for Ogilvy.
Yeah. So Thomas really has a very broad view on what is going on there. We wish that we can spend more time at DLD discussing. We should. And now the floor is to you and this really wonderful panel. And I give you the floor.
Okay. Without exaggeration, this is the most important panel of these 3 days. The internet is being developed, evolved. The way that social media works is really being innovated tremendously in Asia. And at the heart of that is China. China is the world's largest netizen population. 5 times the population of France is the number of people online in China. Larger than the population of the United States. The importance of that is not only are you having a very interesting application of what's going on here in Europe or in the United States, but there's a lot of internal innovation, things happening there that are different from anywhere else. And I think an important part of that, to understand the digital part of it, you have to understand the broader part of what is happening in China and what is happening in Asia. And fortunately, we have 3 fantastic people to talk about this. 2 of whom have recently completed a book on China, and 1 of whom has spent a great deal of time in China investing and looking at tech industry. So I'd like to call up our panelists, please, Joe Schoendorf, Doris and John Naisbitt. In setting up this panel, we were discussing about the audience, about you guys. Where are you coming from? And I'd like to first start out, before we get to John and Doris talking about their book, China Megatrends. Joe wanted to first figure out the familiarity level with John's work that people have here.
2 quick questions. How many people were born 1982 or later? 1982 or later, that's not a hard question.
After 1982, anybody?
All right, how many people here really read Megatrends? A good number. So 1982, we're sitting there, a full manufacturing economy. Along comes John and said, the end is here. The industrial age is ending, and it's going to be replaced with the information age. It was that important. It really drove the rest of my career, the information age, as I think it did everybody here. Hopefully, when we get done in 30 minutes, you'll decide that this is an equally important book about China and is going to influence the rest of your lives in terms of how you interact with that country.
Okay, John, let's quickly go over to you and Doris. China, why should we care?
China, and especially China and its relationships to the West, as we've discussed with you, Joe, will dominate our lives for the rest of the century. It's as simple as that. China becomes the 2nd largest economy in the world this year. and the interplay between China and the West, especially the United States, that theater, as it were, will dominate our lives. And that's why it's important, because it's going to impact on each and every one of us.
Doris.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you put the question, how many of you were born after 1982? And when I remember the audience of yesterday, then, excuse me, including us, the average age has risen quite a bit.
I sort of doubled the age when I walked in the room.
And I wonder, picking up on your words, how important China will be for the internet and for the coming generation, then it seems that we have to do a much better job of raising the awareness of what the position of China will be. Because what we should see here is young people who have most of their life in front of them changing the world and changing the internet. And that's exactly what we see in China today. When we look at China, our generation, then we see people in the 50s who are running China now. But there's a generation growing up with a totally different background, which with a very much as you pointed out, communication via the internet. So this is changing. Our generation is changing, and in China just the same.
Median age is under 25.
Yes.
Which means 2/3 of a billion people are under 25 and weren't even born when you wrote Megatrends.
And they are shaping the China of tomorrow.
Describe a little bit the demographics of China. What is it? Continue on that vein. Is it going to be a place where we're going to see a lot of innovation coming out due to the age of the people, or?
Well, not due to the age of the people, the innovation. That's an interesting question, Tom, because all countries are saying we're going to be an innovative country. And China says it as well. But China is doing something about it in the programs they have in place, because China understands that you can't pass a law or issue an edict that everyone should, or enough people should be innovative. China knows, the leadership knows, that you have to create an environment that's nourishing to not only entrepreneurs, but nourishing to people, to innovators, whom we cannot identify. And what it's doing to create environments that foster innovation is truly remarkable and way ahead of the rest of the world. And this is one of the things that we've been talking about. It's one of many things. Because of the importance of China, we in the West are really pretty ignorant about China and what's really going on. We are coasting along on our old mindsets. One mindset I would just like to mention quickly is this, you turn on CNN and they say, the Communist government of China today. Well, the party's name is the Communist Party, but we haven't found too many communists in China. China is a country with no ideology. China is not capitalist, it's not communist, it's a very pragmatic strategy and mindset to create a viable economy and a good life for the people, and of course has demonstrated that extraordinarily, remarkably, the greatest in history as an example in the last 30 years.
Right, which is interesting. I mean, it is a country that has managed to enrich people and improve their state of their lives in a generation like has never happened before, as you say, in the history of humanity. Yet, China has dominated the news in recent weeks due to the confrontation with Google, which is hardly something that is going to be encouraging innovation. Speak a little bit about this. Is there a contradiction here?
A blip on the screen. A tiny blip on the screen. Sorry, Google. No, it is a contractual consideration. Google agreed, in order to get a license in China, agreed not to have searches on certain subjects. Then 4 years later, using the pretext of hackers, said, we've got to revisit this and so on. By the way, there are much more hacking going on in Russia than there is in China, and Google is not saying a word about that. There was a blog, we read a blog in China the other day that says, what do you think? Do you think that if Google had the top market share in China, they would in the search area, they would do this? This is going to be what is extraordinary as a viewer of this is to take this incident and to have it responded to by the Secretary of State of the United States of America. But in the process, the good news is she made that a plank of the foreign policy of the U.S., freedom and the internet. So it's not all bad. That's not a bad thing.
But is there a contradiction between the control that the government has versus wanting to encourage creativity and innovation?
I think...
The husband-wife team. Yesterday we had the father-son team. Today it's the husband-wife team.
Well, I think that one of the pillars of the new system that China is creating is emancipating the minds. And emancipating the minds.
Right.
And emancipating the mind, to free the mind to think, is not a process that's only happening within the people, the bottom. It is also happening in the government. That means they are slowly gaining self-confidence. And this overreaction that they show in many regards, it's stronger pointed out in the West than it is really experienced in China itself. But this overreacting and this will pass. It is an emancipation process on different levels, and including the government.
Joe, if you could speak a little bit from the practical point of view, from somebody who's investing there, looking to invest there, do you see innovation happening? What are the things you find most exciting, or are you wary of, maybe?
Here's the perspective of the book that I think sets the stage. I started reading it, and I've probably been after you for 2 years. When's the book coming out? Every time I'd see you, I'd ask a question. And
we did it for you, Joe.
And but you did it right. Imagine this, it's 1979. You have no money, you've got 1 billion people, and you have to have a plan to build the second largest company on earth in 30 years. That's what China did. They started in '79 with an economy the size of Libya, and this year they're now going to pass Japan for number 2. And so if you look at the 8 pillars, I really looked at that as, yes, I see that from what we've been doing there. This is the business plan that the leadership came up with. This wasn't a history of something you concluded of how it worked. And you say, these are very smart people running this thing. Pay attention. Now, at XL, we have the great good fortune of working with IDG. Pat McGovern and IDG started making successful venture investments in 1991. We at Axel are now on our 3rd fund with IDG. And I would just say it this way. I remember very clearly the very first time I ever went to China to look at a business plan. And I've got 8 people sitting around a table and all of the shades are down. And they're giving me the presentation, and what they were doing isn't important. I stopped the presentation, and I went and I opened the shade, and I looked out, and then I put the shade back down, and I said, keep going. And they asked me, why'd you do that at the end of the presentation? And I said, because I'm sitting here listening to you, and I needed to look out the window to be sure I was really in China and not in Palo Alto, where I listened to most of those presentations. That sums up how we think about China today.
Please.
And, the West thinks that the Chinese... that the Chinese wake up and the first thing they think is, let me Google to see what happened and what the Dalai Lama said. They wake up in the morning and say, let me see what the stock market did. Let me see what my competitor did. I want to go on with my life. I want to make money. I want to make my life better. And that's the spirit of the Chinese. They feel the social and personal freedom they never had before.
Okay, one moment, John. I want to open it up to questions in just a moment, so please prepare. John, please.
Yeah, the larger picture on this innovation. China will become the second economy in the world this year, around $5 trillion. GDP, but the U.S. is 14 trillion. We have to keep that in perspective. China is emphasizing with innovation the new technologies, BYD, the electric car. Chairman Wang gave us a model of that electric car, which is really cool, especially when you turn it over and see what's on the bottom. Chairman Wang said, you know, we can't compete with Ford and I was going to say General Motors, Ford and some of the other companies in the West because they have 100 years experience in the gasoline-driven car. But with the electric car, we are all at the same starting line. Now, put that forward to all of China. China is emphasizing not what the West has had all this experience in, but all the new technologies, biotechnology, robots, information technology, bullet trains, and this is what their emphasis is in the areas. But what they do is also quite extraordinary. But they're really working for the next century, or at least the fullness of this century.
Sometime, what is it, this year, early next year, they'll have 500 million of these, meaning phones. They cross the 500 million mark of registered phone numbers.
World's largest phone market, in fact. Are there any questions anybody has? Bring in the panel, please. There's the microphones here. Yes, sir. Here.
Yeah, very, very briefly, could you talk a little bit about the downside, specifically the corruption and the lack of transparency, and how you see that getting better or worse, please? Sorry,
what are the risks? What are the downside risks? Talk about corruption. We painted a very positive picture here, but there are risks.
Well, very positive. There are lots of things wrong with China. I mean, but you know, they're only been at it 30 years, and they're doing pretty well. We think they're about a third of the way to where they're going. But you know, the only people who talk more about corruption in China than the West are the Chinese. You know, we monitor at the, if I may put in this plug, at the Naisbitt China Institute in Tianjin, China. We monitor, we have a staff of 28 there, we monitor papers in all of the provinces of China. And let me just report to you that the two biggest issues on local newspapers in China, editorially and in the news coverage, are corruption and the environment. And the West doesn't have any idea that they don't think the Chinese have a clue on this. These are the two big problems, and they have a lot of problems, but on the top of the list are corruption and the environment, and everyone is tuned into that.
There's a question over here.
Sorry. In the beginning, you mentioned that China is doing a lot of things to create an environment for innovation. Could you give some examples of specific things or extraordinary things they're doing?
Well, they are creating high-tech parks, for example, where they not only give the technical environment, but they try to create the social environment to attract people, to give them the nourishing feeling, the nourishing surrounding, including churches and including supporting religion, just to give you an example about how wide this is. And those high-tech parts, of course, are much easier to make by a government that has a clear plan and creates those frames in which people then can do whatever they want to do.
And an extraordinary program is they've identified in these new technologies. They've identified the 10 top people in each of these fields, those that I mentioned plus others. And they have a program now. Their target is to get 5 out of the 10 to come to China to work with their people, to have an interchange, work for companies, work for universities. The universities and the companies will pay the salary. The relocation fund for each person who comes is $146,000 to come and bring your family and settle in China for a while and work at this company where you'll get the salary and so on. This program is oversubscribed for the first two two time segments, I think it's half a year already. And that's just one of the programs in pushing for an environment for innovation.
We all know Warren Buffett and his record of investing. When he decided to look at the electric car industry, he looked at it globally, and he made his bet in China. When we hear our president in our country talking about creating green jobs, let me tell you what he's not telling us. We're going to be putting up a lot of solar panels with a lot of the blue-collar people who were laid off in manufacturing jobs. Those panels are going to be manufactured in China because on a efficiency and cost basis, they're going to be the leaders. They're going to be the leaders.
Yeah, and they just picking up on what you said there. I just read in one of the German magazines that they did innovation on the solar cells and made them thinner, and the quality was not, there was no lack in quality. They got the TÜV easily. So they're really, and there's this young population, as you know, is really so ambitious and so much in competition with each other.
Excellent. We have another question over here. Please identify yourself.
You talked about corruption and the environment as being the two top topics in the media there. I wondered if you could talk about the whole idea of political openness and whether perhaps in the lifetimes of people here we will end up seeing a China with a different political system.
Multi-party China, is it around the corner?
It's not an issue in China, and let me tell you why. The fathers and grandfathers of the young people in China lived a very different life, and they don't have the social and private freedoms that they have today. They were told what job they would have, and they would keep that jobs for their lifetime. They had to get permission from the plant foreman or from the party secretary to get married. They could never get divorced. They couldn't go to the university unless they were appointed by the party to go to the university, which were then closed down during the Cultural Revolution. Today, they can do anything they want with their lives, socially and individually. And they are so preoccupied with that some of these issues, and by the way, the political thing is really lightening up, which we could tell you about, but some of these things are really not germane to Chinese. You have to think about this, think about what the Chinese are thinking about that, about your question. Now, there are a hell of a lot of things wrong with China. What we're emphasizing today in the very brief time we have is things that you might not know about, because all you read in the Western press are the negative things, and they should be read. You should know about those, and we should read about those, and we should do what we can about those. But there's some of the things that we know about, and some things, and the things we've written in our book are not discussed. They're not part of the dialogue, and they should be, and that's why we emphasize them here today.
Okay, we have a bunch of questions. We have very short time. There's a question back here.
Just a moment.
Oh, sorry, please. Okay.
Okay.
And then if you could come up to the microphone.
I have one question according environment and green things. Is China making the same mistakes as Western society did 20 years ago now with new innovative industries and innovation things? Because they have the chance to do it not.
Well, let me, can I do it? No, the Chinese say, wait a minute, does the West really have every moral standing to lecture us about the environment? They've screwed up their environment, now they want to lecture us about what we ought to do. They don't recognize any moral standing for them to do that. They are doing things that are but they're maybe making some of the same mistakes, but they're also doing some things that have never been done before. So that's all part of the picture as well.
Okay, very quickly, we're running very short on time.
Christian Harris, Civitas International. Due to the one-child policy, China is facing major demographic changes. How do you think is this going to influence, and what impact is this going to have on China and China's policy?
Well, they're going to have a shortage in the workforce, and that will drive wages up, which will, on the other hand, be good for the social standard of the people. But as we know, the Chinese, as soon as it begins to be too dramatic, they will turn the one-child policy around like this.
I was shocked to hear you say in the book that while they have a one-child policy in China. They have a 3-child policy in Tibet.
No, minorities are not affected by the one-child policy.
Minorities are excluded. Farmers can have more children than one. So it's
and
just
also
a general.
farmers can have 2. Yeah, it's not one child across the board.
Okay, excellent. I think that's going to be...
Is that a note to end on?
That's almost a note to end on. If you have a further note to end on, please play it now. The biggest challenge you see is corruption in the environment.
No, that's the biggest challenge the Chinese see.
Yes. And what is the biggest challenge you see?
Well, some of those that are articulated by the Chinese as well is the disparity of income and quality of life between urban and rural. The aging problem is coming up very, very soon for them. Yet there are a litany of problems which they also talk about at great length.
The gap between the rural and the coastal, the urban population, but that's an advantage on the other hand because now the factory are moving to the underdeveloped regions, and so that serves. It's just a country that's so big, with different options than tiny ones have.
Excellent.
I told you how many times I've been to China. We all read the Western press. When you read the book, I promise you will learn things you do not know that are important.
Now that's a note to end on.
That's a note to end on. Thank you very much, John, Doris, and Joe. Thank you very much.